Mike McGrattan passed away about a year ago. In Mike's memory, Tim Horton has organized that a special train be passed amongst the N-Scale members of the Railwire community, and this train has traveled far and wide across North America and made many stops on many layouts. Nearing the end of its long trip, the Columbia and Western was fortunate to have Mike's train grace its rails. I never had the pleasure of meeting Mike in person, but I did communicate with him very frequently through email and through the Railwire. Several times we did discuss having Mike come out to Vancouver to meet all the Railwire members here and to tour the Columbia and Western, but unfortunately we never made it happen. As I was running his train across the layout, I realized that this is the tour he would have had if he had visited in person. So Mike, wherever you are, I hope you're finally enjoying your trip across the Columbia and Western. One special project that I was a part of with Mike appeared in the May and June edition of N-Scale magazine. It was called "Oh Canada, Here Come the Canadians," and it was a photo article organized again by Mr. Tim Horton and featuring the modeling work of Jeff Gooderham, Andy Thomas, David Morgan, John Walter, Tim and myself, and of course Mike's Samuel Ridge division of the Puddington Valley. Mike's modeling and photography in that article captured the things that I think Mike was known best for. Set within a realistic prototypical narrative, and often with a very humorous backstory, Mike's modeling expressed emotion and depth and creativity that I think was uniquely Mike. Having reached the junction town of South Slocan, we're going to separate our GMD1s, and the lead unit is going to take the business car up the Slocan Valley while the balance of the train is taken to Castlegar. Where I interacted the most with Mike was actually in the Railwire's weekly weekend update threads. I don't think Mike missed very many of these weekend update threads. I could always count on seeing his work, whatever he was working on, and whether he was happy with it or not. As much as Mike might have liked to point out the flaws that he saw in the models, I saw them as beautiful works of the art, and his prototypical research and attention to the details was greatly appreciated. Looking back on it now, perhaps Mike's attempt to point out all the flaws in his models was really just displaying his humility. Mike was an excellent modeler, and the fact he was humble about it is something that we should remember him for. In 2013, Mike announced that he had been offered and he had accepted his dream job as an employee of Rapido Trains. Mike said he was committed to bringing a new N-scale focus to Rapido, and that he did, with new N-scale locomotives and passenger cars and even a rumor of the fabled turbo train. However, for me, who unlike Mike isn't a passenger train fanatic, what got me most excited was the promise of an N-scale GMD1, that uniquely Canadian locomotive that saw service all across Canada. I spent a couple of formative years in Thunder Bay and remember watching the GMD1s working along the ore docks. So I put down my order for 2 sound-equipped units and I waited patiently for them to arrive. I do have to admit when they showed up I was mildly disappointed because they didn't perform as well as I'd hoped. I believe these were the first N-scale locomotives that Rapido had made, so they were going through a bit of a learning curve and I was on the bleeding edge. Rapido was a very busy place at the time and they were shipping large numbers of new products. I was afraid of getting lost in the shuffle, so I reached out through the Railwire to Mike, and Mike did a great job of making sure that all my issues were addressed, and he didn't let up until I was a happy customer. That's great customer service. And that's why this train on the Columbian Western, even though the Columbian Western is a model of a Canadian Pacific subdivision, is led by 2 CN GMD1s. Mike and I also shared a little bit of professional overlap. Mike had worked for Naramco and Domtar, Canadian pulp and paper giants, and I'd worked for a technology company called Creo that was involved in using software and lasers to put printing dots on pieces of paper that came from those mills. I'd also worked with a company called All North Engineering that was involved in doing the engineering at pulp mills, so I was very interested in the industry. Well, when it came time for me to add the craft pulp mill to my layout, I found Mike's advice and guidance on how pulp mills were laid out to be invaluable. Even though one of his comments, that pulp mills are often surrounded by large amounts of paving in order to make moving large equipment easier, meant that I had to reproduce a very large surface area in asphalt, and that took a lot of time. But the result is much better, and I appreciate your comments, Mike, because it made me a better modeler. Over the last few years of Mike's life, he was becoming increasingly ill. To his credit, he shared that status with people on the Railwire. I hope it helped him. It certainly was valuable for me to know what he was going through. I appreciated knowing. It was during this period that Mike and his son Sam decided that they were going to build a layout together, the Canto subdivision of the Puddington Valley. Every week, Mike would routinely post all the great progress that he and Sam were making. Those posts were always a joy to read, not only because of the great modeling, but the obvious emotional significance of the project as well. Mike's Canto Valley series of posts has now been saved for posterity and archived under the best of the Railwire. Mike was a significant ambassador for the hobby, especially the N-scale portion of model railroading. Although it predates my involvement with him, one of Mike's earlier projects was the Little Putty boxcar, a 50-foot boxcar that made the rounds across many layouts all over the world. Here it is on Lee Weldon's layout. Mike kept Little Putty on a shelf above his desk at Rapido. Little Putty was an example of how Mike used model railroading to bring people together. Mike had occasionally posted things on Railwire about his other interests, so I was aware that he was involved with the Air Force and had done a lot of service work. However, it wasn't until I did some research for this video that I became aware of the extent of his service. In the online notice of Mike's passing, there's a listing of some of the awards that Mike won for all of his service work. It's a very impressive list. I must admit that reading this list has given me pause about the way I spend some of my time. Mike, thank you for not only all your service, but for being a great example. Mike and Sam's work on the Canto subdivision is inspirational not only for the way they imagined and constructed the layout, but also for the way they shared it with others through public shows and on the Railwire. In addition to Mike and Sam's work, I must admit that I've been inspired by the way in which the hobby community has rallied around Mike's passing to celebrate Mike and the way in which he led his modeling life. So thank you, Tim, for the excellent work you did pulling together this train tour. Thank you, Tom and everybody at Railwire for preserving Mike's legacy there. And thank you, Jason and everybody at Rapido for the Mike McGrattan Memorial Gondola. And remember, Mike is watching. You better come through with that turbo train. One last story about Mike before we leave this video. Like many Canadians, Mike and I shared a gentle rivalry regarding our hockey teams. I supported the Vancouver Canucks, and he supported the Toronto Maple Leafs, and over the last couple of decades, both teams have been perennial bottom dwellers in the league. During the Canucks' run for the Stanley Cup in 2011, many cars in the Vancouver area began sporting white Canucks flags on their antennas. Not to be outdone, many of the Sealiners on the Columbian Western started to sport white Canucks flags in place of their extra flags. Now in honor of Mike, Sealiner 4080 will fly Toronto Maple Leaf flags in place of its extra flags. Mike, for you, I hope one day your dear buds once again hold the Stanley Cup high, however not before the Canucks do.